Welcome to this class on spiritual warfare, where we're going to talk about what it looks like to fight for intimacy, identity, belonging, and your destiny. This is session 2, and in this session we're going to talk about dialogue with darkness. So our first session we talked about dialogue with God. We were created for relationship with God, or we said created for secure attachment to the Lord, and that secure attachment is what the enemy wants to attack. That's his primary goal. He wants to destroy intimacy with the Lord. He wants us disconnected and disempowered so that we don't walk in our calling. He wants us to lose our sense of identity, our sense of belonging. He wants us to forget who we are. And as I said in the last session, it's in that place of forgetfulness that demons are present to remind you. Eventually, strongholds form. We're going to talk more in a later session on what strongholds are and how we can tear down strongholds. The good news is that Jesus has overcome, and we can walk in victory when it comes to spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare must be done from a place of relational connection with the Lord. It's that place of relational connection that gives us a sense of joy, and the joy of the Lord is our strength. All right, so in this session, we're going to look more closely of the first account of when this happened in the Bible. So we're going to look at Genesis chapters 1 through 3, and how Adam and Eve's conversation with darkness impacted their intimacy, identity, belonging, and destiny. Before we talk about that, though, we're going to go before the war. Okay, so Genesis chapter 3, we see the war happen. We're going to start in Genesis chapters 1 and 2 in order to lay a clear biblical foundation. I'm going to go back to where it all began. I'm going to go back to the beginning and God's intention for creation. So what did the enemy attack in man? In this session, we're going to really flesh out something called biblical gender. Biblical gender. And this really does matter when it comes to spiritual warfare, okay? Really does matter. So biblical gender, how men and women are created in God's image. This is a rather nuanced topic. But once you understand the foundation, everything else starts to fall into place, and it gets a little clearer how this applies to you, but also how it applies to others that you might be ministering to, and how it applies in the whole arena of spiritual warfare. Hopefully, this teaching will be enough to inspire your thinking on the issue, and that you'll dig even deeper in it. Because it all comes down to the image of God and how we bear God's image on the earth as men and women. This is at the heart of spiritual warfare. I've worked with Bible college students for many, many years now, and I am shocked at how few Bible college or seminary students really understand what it means that we are created in God's image. It's shocking. Most don't know what that means. Gender is a hot topic right now in our culture. There's a lot of disagreement even on what the word means. Google would tell you that there are between 50 to 60 recognizable genders, and the list is growing. And this is alarming because, as you're going to hopefully come to understand, by the end of this teaching, this is the systematic removal of God's image from the face of society. The enemy's at work. I mean, talk about muddying the waters. Biblically, there are 2 genders. According to Google, there's 50 to 60. Getting a little watered down. Now, I want to clarify something on the front end, and I'm going to flesh this out as we go on. But when I use the word gender, I am not talking about biological sex. okay? I'm using it differently. So I'm not using the word gender synonymously with biological sex. I'm using it in a different way, and I'm going to explain that here in a second. All right, the honor of being an image bearer. I talked about this a little bit in session 1. We've been given the profound honor of being created in God's image. And I want to challenge you, when was the last time you really pondered this reality? Like really sat down and pondered it. I've been created in God's image. I've been created in the image of relationship. This reality means something to God, and it means something to Satan. Therefore, it should mean something to us. All right, what is biblical gender? This is my definition for biblical gender. Biblical gender is the characteristics that make up who God is and how he acts in relationship. It's the distinction between God's being and his activity, okay? His being and his activity. The historical meaning of gender is things we treat differently because of their inherent differences. We see God as an engendered being immediately in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God. Okay, pause right there. In the beginning, God. God is. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God does. There's his activity. God is and he does. Distinction is very important to God. He starts making distinctions all the way throughout Genesis chapter 1. He makes a distinction between himself and creation. We call that the first binary. Binary simply means two. Okay, there's one and the other. Biblically, there's always two. There's one and the other. So the first binary that God establishes is between himself and creation. That's an important distinction. The heavens and the earth, light and dark, man and creation. There is a distinction between man and the animal kingdom. There's a distinction between male and female. We can start to discern distinctions biblically. There's a distinction between right and wrong. When the first binary crumbles, all other binaries crumble. What's the first binary? God and his creation. Now, this is the goal of paganism. Paganism always seeks to do away with distinction. You might hear something that like all are one. All are one. I can be one with you. I can be one with the tree. I can be one with the squirrel in the tree. I can be one with God. I can be one with the universe. That's the goal of paganism. All are one. Our sexuality is a reflection of our spirituality. Our sexuality is a reflection of our spirituality. I want to highlight an amazing book. It's called The God of Sex by Dr. Peter Jones. He really goes deep in all of this. Dr. Peter Jones, The God of Sex. Our sexuality is a reflection of our spirituality. Well, think about it. Biblically, or in Christianity, we adhere to the binary. There's one and the other. There's God and his creation, man and creation, male and female. But if we start to remove the distinctions, well, okay, so why can't a man and a man be married? Or why can't a man and a woman all be married? Or why can't a man marry his dog? That was actually a real case. Somebody sued for that. So not trying to be sensational, but just saying when the first binary crumbles, all other binaries crumble. Or we could say it as the person who wrote Proverbs 29:18 said it, where there's no revelation, the people cast off restraint. All right, so biblical gender is a way of categorizing the distinction between God's being, you can say his presence, and his activity. God is and he does. We talked about these verses in the first session from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, where God creates man in his image. Let's look a little deeper at these verses. Men bear unique aspects of God's image, and women bear unique aspects of God's image. And when they come together in marriage, there's a fuller picture of the image of God. The image of God can only be seen on the earth in the context of the binary. One and the other, male and female. It's such an important truth. The image of God can only be seen on the earth in the context of the binary. Now I want to say just a real quick word about singleness or celibacy. If you're called to singleness, the single person is still not meant to be androgynous or asexual, but fully heterosexual. A lot of pagan religions, the highest goal to be attained is actually androgyny. For the consecrated celibate, there is a special grace from God to live beyond his or her sexual desires and give themselves fully to the church, who is their other. So there's still one and the other. In God's creation, unity or union does not do away with distinction. So I'm married to my wife Candace. The Bible tells us the two have become one flesh, but we haven't somehow morphed into some androgynous blob. I'm still Nate and she's still Candace. They're still one and the other, male and female. So there will always be a distinction between God and man and creation, male and female. All right, let's go a little deeper into this Genesis 1 text. First thing we can discern from the text is that God's creation is heterosexual. What do I mean by that? That's an inflammatory statement. Oh well. What do I mean by that? Well, simply, I mean the prefix hetero means different or distinction. It means opposite. That's what the prefix hetero means. And as I've been saying, in God's creation, there's always two. There's one and the other. Sexually speaking, you will always be attracted to what you perceive to be the other. And I fleshed that out more in many of the teachings I've done on same-sex attractions, but we don't have time to get into all of that in this series. Now, this is opposed to the prefix homo, which means same. Well, let's liken that back to what we were talking about with paganism. All are one. Culture wants to do away with any gender distinction or gender binary, and it has its roots in paganism. There's a spiritual reality there. What did I say the enemy's strategy was? Systematically remove the image of God. Well, he can do that if he removes the gender binary. Now, this is why the homosexual agenda is so powerful, because it has its roots in paganism. It's not just about sex or even who you're choosing to love. It has a spiritual component. Now, have you ever thought about this? Okay, so statistically speaking, about 2 to 3% of the population is gay. And of that 2 to 3%, there's an even smaller percentage of people that are actually activists. So your gay neighbor probably isn't an activist, right? They just want to live their lives and whatever. So there's a very small percentage of people that are actually homosexual activists. Have you ever asked yourself, how did this small part of our population get so powerful that they control the media, what's on TV, the public schools? what your kids learn? I mean, I could blow your mind with all kinds of stuff that's being taught in public schools. It's because it's spiritually driven. When the creature is worshipped rather than the creator, demons are present. So this would be a cultural and geographical stronghold. God's image cannot be seen or experienced within homosexuality. There's no binary. There's no other. And this is why I say very boldly, even though it's not popular, gay marriage is the ultimate defiling of God's image. And as this happens, the multitudes are laughing. In recent years, we've seen actually more than two. There's been quite a few television shows that have introduced gay wedding story arcs. So in this first picture here, this was actually quite several years ago. It was a show called Glee. This is Blaine and Kurt. Blaine was a high school senior engaged to be married to Kurt, who was in his first year of college. You probably recognize the second picture. This is Cam and Mitchell from a sitcom called Modern Family. There was a gay marriage story arc about them. And it's breaking new ground. Here's what just absolutely devastated me, particularly with the Modern Family story arc. Millions of Americans tuned in and laughed at the defiling of God's image. Millions of people tuned in and laughed at the defiling of God's image. We should be trembling. In the book of Isaiah, the Lord asks the question, who's trembling at my word? Let me tell you something. Much of the church right now is trembling at the LGBT lobby, but they're not trembling at the word of God. We haven't redefined marriage in our country. We've undefined marriage. And we're rapidly losing a sense of who we are as men and women created in God's image. This is the enemy's goal. There's warfare happening here. Sounds a lot like what happened in the garden. I want to say a quick word about another cultural stronghold that's really taking the church by storm. And so I got to get on my soapbox here a minute and talk for a second about the gay Christian movement. There's many within even the evangelical church now that would say, God can't change you if you're struggling with same-sex attractions or gender dysphoria or those sorts of issues. God can't change you. He doesn't want to change you. You should embrace it and live it to the fullest. It's God's gift to you. And you can take on being gay as an identity. It's very popular now, even in the evangelical world. It's shocking to me that we've gotten this far in the church. All right, so, well, is that okay? I would say no. Let's look at this in light of the scriptures that we've been studying. So we've been talking about biblical gender. God is and God does. Both are important. Both aspects of God, who God is important, his being and his activity. So as men and women created in God's image, both are important for us as well. Who we are and what we do. We can't do gay, but we also can't be gay. Now, just a quick clarification. I'm not talking about the presence of same-sex attractions that somebody might be experiencing. I'm talking about the embracing of same-sex attractions as an identity that shapes your reality. Okay? an identity that shapes your reality. To take on a gay identity is to step outside of God's created order and essentially out of the flow of reality. You're stepping outside of God's heterosexual creation. You're rejecting your sense of belonging. Somehow you're always different. You're the odd man out. One of the things that I've learned in 20 years of ministry to same-sex attracted men and women is how important it is for them to learn to celebrate their sameness regarding their sex and not to exploit or accentuate their differences. If you've ever been to a gay pride parade, you see a lot of that, right? Everybody accentuating the different. Really, that's brokenness on display, saying, I don't fit. I don't belong. And the only way that I can deal with this pain is to celebrate it and hope that other people will celebrate it with me. Doesn't work that way. Taking on a gay identity essentially shuts down the healing process and hinders receptivity of future blessings the Lord may have in his heart for the struggler. It's letting the old man remain, and it's a refusal to walk in righteousness and holiness. Here's the good news, though. The good news for the same-sex attracted is that in God's creation, there's no such thing as a homosexual. Only broken heterosexuals. We all have to live in the flow of reality God has established, regardless of our feelings and attractions. So that's the good news. My feelings, my attractions, all of that doesn't establish reality. God establishes reality, and I have to live in his reality if I want to live in reality. Now, I can live in some kind of imaginary world, some kind of fantasy world full of magical thinking. I can do that, but I'm not going to get my needs met in that world. This is important in spiritual warfare. It's important for us to understand as a church, because the reason why I'm using this as an example is because this thinking has infiltrated our church, and it's all about the image of God. Man, the enemy's taken us out at the knees. It's so important in spiritual warfare. I have to do spiritual warfare as a man in order to be effective in spiritual warfare. I'm a man. I can't do spiritual warfare in a dress and be effective. Okay? I think you get the point. Some people would say that you can. The image of God must be creative. So this was the first commandment given to Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply. Okay? So the Lord said, this is who you are. First thing he told them to do, be creative. Now, we see the enemy's strategy in attacking not only Adam and Eve's identity, but also in attacking their functionality. All right, going back to the Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27 text, going a little deeper. Second thing we can discern from the text is that God has gender and that he is masculine and feminine. All right, now I'm going to explain this. What do I mean by that? Again, when I talk about gender, I'm not talking about biological sex. I am not saying that God is a man and a woman. I'm not saying God is male and female. Those are terms that identify somebody's biological sex. I am talking about characteristics that make up who God is and how he acts in relationships. So God's being, we would label that the true feminine. God's doing, we would label that the true masculine. Okay? So very different things here that I'm talking about. All right, so let's work through the progression of the verses. Let us make man in our image. Okay, God is spirit. We too have human spirits, and our spirits have been created in the image of God. Okay? The core of who you are has been created in God's image. But we live on planet Earth, and therefore we need bodies, right? I need a body to interact with you. If I was a disembodied spirit, I could not interact with you. That would be kind of weird, right? Be a little weird. All right, so we live on planet Earth, we need bodies. Thus, the verse continues, male and female, he created them. Okay? So we must engage in spiritual warfare, spirit, soul, and body. We're going to get into all three of those, all right? Here's a quote from Donald Blosh from his book, The Battle for the Trinity. He writes, while the biblical witness is clear that the living God transcends sexuality, that he is neither male nor female, it is equally clear that he encompasses masculinity and femininity within himself. Indeed, we are created in his image as male and female. C.S. Lewis said it this way, gender is a reality and a more fundamental reality than sex. God, who is spirit, is more real than anything we can see or experience in the natural realm. Who he is, his gender, his attributes, and our bodies are a reflection of this unseen reality. Christopher West, he's a Catholic theologian. He's done a lot of work with John Paul II's theology of the body. Did I say that right? John Paul II? Yeah. Pope John Paul II. But Christopher West has taken the theology of the body and made it accessible to us. Love, love, love Christopher West and his work. But he says this at his conferences, your body reveals the truth of your human spirit. This was a healing truth for me when I realized that my body revealed something about the core of who I was. He goes on to say, holiness is the truth of the human spirit lived in and through the body. Jesus said that the Father is desiring worshipers who will worship him in spirit and in truth. That's what he's saying. Your body reveals something about the core of who you are. And we're going to build upon this later on when we talk about worship and warfare in the body. Your body is an important part of the spiritual warfare process. Because we're Christians, we're not Hindus. We can't just meditate the demons away. We're of the natural realm. We'll talk about that more. All right, let me just give you a little bit more on the true masculine and the true feminine and what we're talking about there. So some of the characteristics of the true masculine that we see in the image of God. Okay, so if you're saying, Nate, where did you come up with these? Well, I looked at God as revealed in the Bible. That's where I got them, okay? And that's where you should get them too. That's where we should get our understanding of who we are. So again, the definition of the true masculine, the power to act. Some of the characteristics would be strength. Now, I'm not just talking about big muscles. I'm talking about an internal fortitude. We see this kind of strength in Jesus when he said yes to the cross. Initiating or extending towards, pursuing. Jesus first loved us. He pursued us. The true masculine orders chaos. God ordered the heavens and the earth. The true masculine creates. The true masculine stands for truth. The Bible calls Jesus the faithful witness in Revelation chapter 1. It's one of my favorite names of Jesus. Jesus was the faithful witness of who God is and who we are, even unto death. Even though they crucified him for it, he was the faithful witness. I love that name. He stood for truth. The true masculine acts in relationship. The true masculine protects. Of course, God is our great protector. He's a shield about us, and the true masculine provides. Jehovah Jireh, our provider. The true feminine definition, the capacity to be. So some of the characteristics of the true feminine that we see in the image of God as revealed through his word would be tenderness, receptivity. This is about our ability to receive the seed of the Lord and bear fruit. Of course, we see this revealed in a woman's body as she has the capacity to receive the seed of the man. The true feminine nurtures life. The true feminine arouses strength. Now, the true feminine can't impart strength, but it can arouse strength, okay? Beauty, 1 Peter 3:4. This is the kind of beauty that I'm talking about. It says, rather let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of the Lord. Rest. On the seventh day, God rested. So this further reinforces God just isn't a bundle of activity, he's also a being. So we all need the capacity to rest, okay? Knowing that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, no anxiety, no racing thoughts. There's an inner peace before God. Now, the world order pre-fall was this. Belief in the garden, belief was, okay? So Adam and Eve, this was their state of being. There was no doubt. There was no unbelief. So Adam and Eve trusted in the character, or you could say the gender of God. They knew that God was faithful and true. Belief was the essence of their union with the Father, okay? So if we're going to be in relationship with someone, we have to start with belief. So, you know, if I want to be in relationship with you, I have to, first of all, believe that you exist, right? Okay, if I don't believe that you exist, then I can't be in relationship with you. And then the more that I believe about you, the more that I'm able to be in relationship with you. So if I believe that you're good, if I believe that you like me, if I believe that you love me, then I'm going to be more able to be in relationship with you. Well, Adam and Eve believed God. And therefore, they were in agreement with God about his thoughts and his feelings toward them. Their thinking, their emotions were in agreement with God, as was their behavior, their actions. So their belief and their agreement motivated their action. The true masculine was motivated by their belief and their agreement. And in action, Adam and Eve experienced the Father's blessing on them. The result, confidence and love before God, a heart free from shame, a heart open to God. Okay? So this was the result of Adam and Eve's secure attachment to the Lord. We call that the way of the Spirit. The role of the true masculine in relationships. So think about it like this. Within each person, we all have the capacity to receive. Right? We all have the capacity to receive, or we'd call that the true feminine, the place where we experience union and where we receive. And that's simply all it is. Okay? Just like a radio. A radio receives a signal, right? The true masculine is the defender of the true feminine. So it's the boundary, it's the protector. It's meant to open and close the gate. Say, good stuff in, I'll receive the good, I'm going to keep the bad out. And all of that impacts what's going on in our soul, our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, and then, you know, our subsequent behaviors. So the true masculine is meant to guard and protect the true feminine from deception. We are not victims of the enemy, and we are not to be passive in relationship with him. So Jesus doesn't want to control your thoughts, your emotions, or your choices. He desires that you would be self-controlled by walking daily in the Spirit. Jesus isn't going to do your thinking for you. There's no Jedi mind control in Christianity. Accusation, condemnation, shame, lies, all of those sorts of things are to be met with a fiery zeal to defend the true feminine. Think about Jesus cleansing the temple. It's a great picture of how we're to drive darkness out of our temples. Empowered by love, the true masculine drives out fear. So you were created to be Lord over your garden or your soul. A lot of times the heart the word garden is used to describe the heart in Scripture. You're to be Lord over your garden, and you have the right to say to the enemy, "Get out of my garden." Which is what should have happened in Genesis chapter 3. Think about the scenario. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but you have Eve, embodying the true feminine, receptive, relational. Here comes the serpent, ready to have a conversation. Where was the true masculine? Where was the boundary? The man who was there with her said nothing. And they both were deceived. The enemy's lies always boil down to this: did God really say? And you can always boil it down to that. Did God really say that? All right. In relation to God, we're all feminine. What does that mean? Well, we're all in the feminine position of first receiving, needing to receive from God. So Mario Bergner, in his book Setting Love in Order, writes, all of humanity, males and females alike, are in the feminine position of responding to God's acts of initiation. Moreover, when we refer to the church as she or as the bride of Christ, we do not mean that it is composed of females, nor when we refer to God as he, or to Christ as our bridegroom, do we mean that God is male. C.S. Lewis wrote in his book, That Hideous Strength, what is above and beyond all things is so masculine that we are all feminine in relation to it. So God is the great masculine that first loved us. And we must first respond to his love. We need each other, so both genders are necessary. One isn't better than the other. They complement each other. So how does this look for us as men and women? Okay, well, men, you have a male spirit, a male soul, and a male body. Okay? You're male at the core of who you are. And all that the Lord has called you to be and do, you have to do as a man. I know it seems so simple, right? But we're really confused about this in our culture. Women, you have a female spirit, a female soul, and a female body. Nothing about you is androgynous. You are totally other than a man. And all that God has called you to be and do, you have to do as a woman. They're different. We're different. Men and women are different. We think differently. We do emotions differently. We behave differently. But because men and women are created in the image of God, we possess both masculine and feminine dimensions. Okay, what does that mean? Well, simply this: men still need to be receptive, nurturing, and able to rest, right? Men still have to be able to operate in the true feminine. I have to be able to receive from God. I need to be able to rest. God rested. But I'm going to do it as a man. Okay? Likewise, women need to be strong. They need to stand for truth. They need to be protective. I love this picture, the one in the far corner there. This is a mom. It's a real picture, and it's in a country where there's a war going on. I don't know the country. But that is such an amazing picture of a mom protecting her kids. That's like mama bear, right? That's the true masculine, okay? So sometimes people get, confused about this. I've had women say to me, so are you telling me that I'm not supposed to be masculine, or I can't be? I'm saying, no, you need to be fully feminine and fully masculine as a woman. And men, you need to be fully masculine and fully feminine as men. So however you rest, men rest, that sort of thing. Leanne Payne, in her book Crisis in Masculinity, writes, our Creator, holding all that is true and real within himself, reflects both the masculine and feminine, and so do we. The more nearly we function in his image, the more nearly we reflect both the masculine and the feminine in their proper balance, that is, in the differing degrees and aptitudes appropriate to our sexual identities as male and female. Quoting from Andy Komisky, author of the Living Waters curriculum and many other books, highly recommend Andy's stuff. He says, our biological gender identity, we need to be grounded in the gender identity tied to our biological sex. An affirmed child is always one who has been adequately blessed and built up as a distinctly male or female person, okay? So really, this now is getting into belonging. Where do I belong? Mario Bergner, in his book Setting Love in Order, writes, clearly it is correct for a man to say that his is a masculine gender identity, and for a woman to say that hers is a feminine one. We not only possess masculine and feminine qualities, but also by our sex we belong to one gender or the other. A secure sense of belonging to one's gender is central to having a healthy personal identity. So your biological sex reveals the gender to which you belong. Okay? All right, let's go back to the enemy's strategy. Attack your secure attachment to the Lord. Our attachments inform my identity. So we forget who we are and we lose our sense of belonging to God, but also we lose our sense of belonging in the world of men or in the world of women. I mean, think about that. As a man, I can lose my sense of belonging to the world of men. I don't even feel a part of the world of men. That's happening in our culture. That's the enemy. That's spiritual warfare. I always tell pastors, youth pastors, people who ask me about this, what can I do? I say, bless and affirm gender. It's one of the most powerful things you can do as an individual in the body of Christ. And this is spiritual warfare. Okay, again, so I just want to make spiritual warfare so relational, okay? So think about it. You've got a young boy in church. Maybe he's not stereotypically masculine, not the sporty kid. Probably gets picked on, but that boy is super creative. Now, number one, that creativity is a masculine characteristic. So you can bless and affirm his creativity as masculine. But how can you do spiritual warfare for that young boy? You can go to the Lord. You can say, okay, Lord, give me a word for him about who he is. And you can bless and affirm his identity. You even have to be weird about it and be like, hey, thus saith the Lord. Just say, hey, you know what? I noticed this about you, and I just want to bless this. That is so masculine. That's spiritual warfare. You are partnering with the Lord in tearing down strongholds that are forming in that young boy's life. Or for the young girl, maybe she's more tomboyish, and so people are saying she's, a lesbian or whatever. Say, Lord, would you reveal something to me about her beauty? or about who she is. It's not about that whether or not she curls her hair or wears makeup, but show me that internal beauty that I can bless and affirm. Again, you're tearing down strongholds that are forming, while the cement is hopefully still wet. All right, well, we're going to go through this quickly. We know the story doesn't end in Genesis 1 and 2. Adam and Eve have a conversation with darkness and it ends in darkness. Dialogue with darkness ends in darkness. Leanne Payne used to say that all the time at all of her conferences. That's been a guiding principle in my life for 20 years. Dialogue with darkness ends in darkness. We were not meant to have conversations with the enemy. We're going to talk about that throughout this series with what spiritual warfare looks like. Adam and Eve had a conversation with darkness. Enter fear, enter shame, enter identity confusion. Who am I? Who am I now? I don't know who I am disconnected from the Lord. I don't know who I am apart from Him. What did I say about that place of forgetfulness? Demons are present to remind you. Now, when it comes to questions of identity, certainly Satan is the wrong person to ask, but we're tempted into those conversations every day. They're powerful voices. They're all contrary to the voice of the Lord. Because of sin, we're all sexually and relationally broken. We're all trying to figure out how to love. So I talked about the world order pre-fall. Adam and Eve believed God. They were in agreement with God. It impacted their actions. And because of that, they had confidence before the Lord. Well, now because of sin, the world is disordered. We have a new world disorder that's founded on unbelief. Unbelief is the new state of being. In that place of unbelief, we're in disagreement with God. There's a mistrust, which leaves us very passive. Passive in our dealings with the enemy. The door gets left wide open. The true masculine leaves the door wide open, and the true feminine is just deceived because of it. The result, experience constant torment from the enemy. You're wide open to his lies and accusations. You have shame before God, and that shuts down our hearts. Our relational circuits get turned off. Our hearts are closed to God. Maybe we're operating in some defensive detachment. This is the way of the flesh. Okay, because of sin, a false self gets forged. The counterfeit of the true masculine and the true feminine. So just real briefly, the false feminine perverts strength and refuses tenderness in an attempt to gain power and control. It's always about power and control with the counterfeit. Always about power and control. The false feminine is driven to be masculine to protect oneself. Some of the characteristics of that would be being aggressive, dominant, controlling through manipulation and seduction. In extreme cases, violence or rape. The false feminine controls chaos. It doesn't order chaos, it controls it. Activism, I talked about that in the first session, where woundings are fueling a stand for perceived truth. Again, control, domination in relationships, sexual conquests fuel self-hatred and feelings of powerlessness. And sexual domination is a way to prove strength, gain power over a past abuser, and work out rage. The false masculine, the definition would be refuses strength and perverts tenderness in an attempt to gain power and control. Again, it's about power and control. The false masculine is driven to be feminine to receive or feel love. Remember in the first session I talked about that sense of being disconnected and unable to feel or sense the Lord's presence or being securely attached to others. Well, this is the counterfeit, the demonic solution. Some of the characteristics would be passivity, Believes controlling pleasure makes one powerful and gives a sense of control, avoids chaos, postmodern thinking. So instead of standing for truth, the false masculine would say, well, you have your truth, I have my truth. Let's all get along. Victim mentality in relationships, allowing oneself to be used sexually fuels self-hatred and feelings of powerlessness. And pleasure becomes a way to control the abuser. Adam and Eve sinned, and in doing so, they went from authority to slavery. Think about it. In the garden, nothing had power over Adam and Eve. Even God chose not to use his power over them. He didn't want robots. He said they were free to give themselves fully and wholeheartedly. They were given dominion. And yet, because of their sin, all of creation entered into slavery. You can see that in Romans 8, verse 20. They went from fruitfulness to impotence. So in the garden, Adam and Eve were aroused by each other. They were able to inseminate each other's thinking, and there was fruit that came forth because of that. Sexuality was so much more than just two bodies. Adam was aroused by every part of Eve. So there was a beautiful dance of strength and receptivity, but it's not so anymore. Instead of insemination, we have manipulation and deception, where I want to force my ideas upon you. Sexuality outside of the garden has gone from being other-centered to self-centered. Beloved, the image of God is worth fighting for. This is what, if you could boil down my 20 years of ministry, this is what it all boils down to. Standing for the image of God, fighting for the image of God. So you might, say, well, that department store, that well-known department store, who made the decision to eliminate boys and girls signs from its toys and bedding departments. What's the big deal? They're just eliminating gender stereotypes and gendered marketing. What's the big deal with that? Well, you know what? There's nothing wrong with little girls playing with stereotypical boys' toys and vice versa. That's not my issue. My little girl loves to play with Legos, and they play with all different kinds. She'll grab a gun too, and play guns with the boys. But the larger issue remains. God's image is being systematically removed from the culture. No boys' toys, no girls' toys. No boys' bathrooms, no girls' bathrooms. No boys, no girls. No gender binary. And this should alarm us as believers. Should alarm us as believers. But the image of God is worth fighting for. Without the image of God present to us visibly and experientially, we're utterly lost as persons. We have no true north, and without such a compass, we cannot lead the masses into the kingdom of God. All right, in the next session, we're going to see how Jesus' finished work on the cross not only redeems us, but restores our identity, our belonging, and our destiny in God. Amen.